On March 1st, 2023, version 3.5 Windbloom's Breath was released, and with it came the event banner housing Dehya, a 5-star pyro character. Not only was she a heavily anticipated unit after extensive involvement in the Sumeru Archon questline, but she was also the first pyro character to be released in a very long time. In fact, the last pyro unit that came out before Dehya was Toma back in 2021, over a year and a half ago. We went through the entirety of 2022 without a single new pyro unit, not that we needed one. After an excessive number of them were brought out in a short time frame, it was high time the other elements got some attention. Pyro has been on a steady decline since then. The market share of Vaporize and Melt has diminished considerably in favor of other reactions, including the new Dendro ones, and while there are still a good number of regulars like Bennett, Hu Tao, Yoimiya, and Shangling, the element was in desperate need of fresh meat, and they could not have picked a better time to bring in a newcomer. Expectations ran very high for Dehya. As Genshin's second true Pyro Greatsword user, I say second because Xinyan's more physical, a lot of players, myself included, expected her to be the spiritual successor to Dilu, who has a special place in many of our hearts. And how should I put this? In the nicest way I can say this, thank goodness her character appeal rivals that of Alhaitham and Nahida, otherwise she may have been the saddest excuse of a 5-star ever produced. While her banner sales have been surprisingly decent given the circumstances, discourse surrounding her effectiveness in-game has been nothing short of controversial, so even though she literally came out like only a few weeks ago, in the spirit of both addressing what all the hullabaloo is about and to capitalize on topical matters, for today's episode of Why No One Plays, I bring you Dehya, the Flame Main. First and foremost though, let's talk about something nice. As part of their little anime venture, Opera GX has partnered up with me for this video's sponsor. I've been working with them for a while, since they were my first sponsor way back in 2021, and I still use their browser to this day. Opera GX is a resource-efficient gaming browser that has everything you want from other browsers, but with the added benefit of extreme amounts of customization. For starters, it allows you to choose animated wallpaper themes. The one I'm using right now is the Lantern Right one, and yes, I'm a Xiaomi shipper, don't at me. There's also a bunch of other features like video pop-ups and music players, so for anyone who wants to watch YouTube without having to pull up an entire window, you can do that with Opera. Same goes for music. The GX player lets you log into Spotify, Apple, and YouTube Music directly from the sidebar, alongside any social media and messaging platforms you're into, including Twitter and Instagram to name a few. The browser's main draw, in my opinion, is the accessibility. Everyone knows how much Google Chrome sucks the life out of your computer for no reason sometimes, and to counter this, Opera GX allows you to set a hard cap on how much processor, RAM, and even bandwidth it's allowed to use at a time. And if you go into the settings, they have a myriad of different features, especially if you check the advanced ones. For those who are thinking about switching but don't feel like going through the hassle of moving everything over, you can actually synchronize your bookmarks, cookies, history, and whatnot from other browsers onto Opera at the press of a button. Very convenient. Opera GX is constantly being updated with new stuff. I've been using it as my main browser for over 2 years now, and I firmly recommend them. Be sure to check my link down in the description below if you want to try it out. Always a pleasure to rep Opera as usual, but for now, let's get back to the video. Where do I start? As mentioned earlier, according to iOS sales and the App Store data from Chinese users, Dehya and Sino's banner has been performing unexpectedly well, even amidst all the doomsaying on Twitter. Within the first 2 days, the banner has earned just over $6 million. Not too bad for a banner with a supposedly low-tier character and a mid-tier's rerun. Unfortunately, that's about as far as it would go. Entering day 3, 4, and 5, the sales have fallen below the median average, and I doubt it's gonna improve from here on out. Now, I personally don't pay attention to leaks, mostly because I would rather just wait until the character is officially released, but it was almost impossible for me to not be made aware of the immediate problems regarding her gameplay. Theory crafters and other creators were quick to analyze Dehya's kit and run numbers on her, and it wasn't long before they found out something was very wrong about her. In her defense, Pyro was already hanging by a thread in comparison to the new meta elements like Electro, Hydro, and Dendro, so one could argue that expectations for her were unreasonable, especially coming off an impressive string of banners and reruns that featured a ton of good units. But that's just it. Even those who had modest hopes for Dehya were sorely disappointed, and to make matters worse, a lot of the issues within her design are counterproductive mistakes that miHoYo should have learned from ages ago. We have a lot of material to go through, so let's get started, beginning with a circumstantial factor. In regards to her poor sales, much of that has to do with the fact that she is going to be a permanent unit like Tignari, which may also explain her underwhelming gameplay, as there's a possibility that a brand new player might acquire her as their first 5-star. Outside of that, most players are skipping her banner out of consideration that they'll inevitably pull for her when losing a 50-50 down the road. Let's go through her abilities for the uninitiated. Her elemental skill Molten Inferno has 2 versions, one that creates a field and the other that deals empower damage when in the field. While inside the area, damaging enemies will cause them to take follow-up pyro damage, not unlike Raiden Shogun's skill. The attack scales off of both Dehya's attack and max HP and can be triggered every 2.5 seconds. Additionally, while inside the field, characters have increased resistance to stagger, and a portion of damage taken will be stored as Redmane's blood and then redirected to Dehya, causing her to take that absorbed amount as damage over time. Okay, a very immediate problem. The only time Dehya doesn't absorb damage is when she stores 200% of her maximum health, meaning it's possible for you to unintentionally kill Dehya from the damage taken if you don't have some way to regenerate your team's HP. Other units with self-inflicted damage like Hu Tao's Guide to Afterlife or Niloo's Battlefield Chorus have workarounds. For the former, Hu Tao only drains a portion of her current health, making it impossible for her to die from her own skill. As for the latter, the chorus only damaged the active character, which you can circumvent through healing and shielding. There are two factors that make it far more likely for you to kill Dehya on accident. First, most conventional healing abilities only recover the active character. For example, Kokomi's jellyfish only heals the active character. For her to regenerate her entire party's health, she has to auto-attack while her burst is active. Not every healer has that ability, so you'll find yourself swapping to Dehya several times throughout a fight just to keep her alive. Second, shielding is out of the question for her. To stack up Redmane's blood, damage has to register on her or her team, otherwise the game will simply think you didn't get hit by anything. Shields are still the premier form of defense, as it prevents you from getting staggered since the shield took the blow instead. In her case, you're forced to take damage if you want to make the most of her skill, which also means you're forced to micromanage her health at all times to ensure she doesn't accidentally die. Also, before some of you interject by saying that's what her passive talent is for, while Stalwart and True's recovery should more or less cancel out the bleed, it only activates once every 20 seconds. Secondly, the damage reduction from Instinting Sucker is not enough to offset this. You need a healer on your team. You might be wondering, what's the payoff for all that trouble? Absolutely nothing. Yep, if you were expecting some kind of fat gum quirk from My Hero Academia where she stores the damage to throw right back at her opponent, you get to eat shit. The dot damage does nothing, she just takes damage. The entire time you, and I'm sure many of us, thought there must be some amazing payoff. Nope, just shield your team. It's the only way you stop her from exploding for no reason. See, I'm all for conditional downsides. This mechanic in particular happens quite often in video games, that one character who stores damage taken to use in a revenge attack, and it even falls in line with their personality. But for some inexplicable reason, Redmane's blood does nothing but serve as an inconvenience. I spent the entire 2 minutes talking about how, oh, you gotta take care of her health and manage it so she can store all that blood. No, that doesn't even do anything. But perhaps, since it's purely an optional thing, it's not good but it's not bad either. True, if it's something you can avoid altogether, that means the measure of Dehya's elemental skill lies in its numbers, and you're not going to find a whole lot of solace in that either. Raging Flame, the empowered version of the two, only deals a maximum of 240% at rank 10, which is quite low, and the echoing fire from the area doesn't scale that well either, a paltry 108% of her total attack and only 1.86% of her max health. You'd be hard pressed to see anything more than mid to high 4 digits, pretty underwhelming for a skill that does nothing but do damage. Typically, echoing damage is a fantastic weapon to have at your disposal, as it allows you to supplement the active character for one-man reactions. However, as I mentioned in previous videos on Pyro, it's often the one triggering the reaction, not facilitating it, and even then, this kind of scaling is almost pathetic. For comparison, Toma's Fiery Collapse can be triggered once every second and deals 123.2% of his attack as damage. I'm choosing level 13 because it's more likely for you to have C5 Toma than C5 on Dehya. Dehya's Fiery Sanctum has less attack scaling, only compensated by a minuscule amount of her HP, and triggers every 2.5 seconds. Comparing an elemental skill with a burst might sound unfair, but we're talking about a 5-star versus a subpar 4-star. These numbers are bad even for the standards of Day 1 Genshin. Augmenting it by an additional 3.6% through her first Constellation won't remedy that issue, certainly not for $200 to $300. Constellation 2 doesn't improve it by that much either. What's funny is that Xiangling's Guoba does more damage than Dehya's skill. Her Elemental Burst is another counterproductive mess in and of itself. Leonine Bite is a very unique ultimate, and not in a good way. How it works is that Dehya unleashes a barrage of pyro damage in front of her before ending with a finishing blow, kinda like a Tenet combo from Tekken. During this time, she can't use her elemental skill or use any of her normal attacks, and both are replaced with a new skill that, when pressed, increases the number of hits you dish out during that barrage. At any point while attacking, you can cancel the channel by jumping out though. Sounds impressive on paper until you realize you get no invincibility frames after the initial cast, so if you want to get all her hits off, she's wide open. The real problem is, attacks from Leonine Bite don't count as normals, meaning she can't use any of the myriad of powerful supportive skills that would ostensibly synergize very well with this kind of attack. Yelan, Xingqiu, Beidou, none of them. Given the fact that Double Hydro is probably the last bastion of Pyro being a viable element flat out doesn't work on Dehya's strongest attack, I'd go so far as to say her ultimate is even more dysfunctional than Yoimiya's, and once again, her innate damage doesn't make up for this. Each individual hit only has a base scaling of 178% of her attack and just over 3% of her max health, and the maximum number of hits you can pull off is 10 for 1780% plus 30% max HP. The numbers may not look too bad in totality, but this is over the course of 4 seconds, not counting the initial animation, whereas most ultimates are only about 1 or 2 seconds in length, and it's a lot easier to chain elemental reactions with theirs. The only way Dehya can reliably get a reaction chain off her ultimate is through a cryo unit like Ganyu or Shunhe. Hydro units cannot follow up on her attacks. By the way, remember how her skill does that echoing fire damage and grants her 60% mitigation from her self-inflicted dot damage? The field dissipates when using her burst, for no reason, and there's no constellation that addresses this. She flat out can't use her skill and burst at the same time. It's properties like this that make me wonder how the hell no one from her design team saw this. There's no way in the 7 hells this was just glossed over, leading me to believe this was done intentionally. But then it beggars belief. Why? Why did they feel the need to hamstring her like this? It's not even like, oh, it's a minor inconvenience. Dehya's kit feels like it was designed by 2 different teams, and then they thought she would be a 4-star character before miHoYo said she would be a 5-star at the last minute. And even for a 4-star, her numbers are abysmally weak. Yanfei can probably do twice the amount of damage Dehya can. To give you an idea just how poor her numbers are, look at Constellations 4 and 6. At the price of 5 copies of her, your grand prize is 16.5 recovered energy and 27.5 of your max health restored. That's it. Diluc's Constellation 4 increases the total damage of Searing Onslaught by 40% if you wait 2 seconds. Not the most impressive either, but Diluc was a day 1 5-star. Dehya's a 5-star release halfway through version 3. I fail to understand how they thought these parameters were acceptable, and you can't use the excuse that she's a standard banner unit. She's blatantly worse than most other pyro units in the game. To her credit, Constellation 6 is not half bad. First, it boosts the crit rate of Leonine by 10%, and then anytime one of the hits during the barrage lands a crit, subsequent hits gain 15% bonus crit damage, and the total duration extends by a small amount, for a max of 60% bonus crit damage and 2 more seconds. Not too shabby. 60% crit damage is no laughing matter, but lest you forget, you can't consistently achieve Vaporize on these hits because they don't trigger Xingqiu and Yelan's follow-up damage, so it's a moot point. Base numbers and limiters are not the be-all end-all. Everyone lost their minds when they found out Kokomi was unable to crit, and look where she is now. But Kokomi has the benefit of Hydro being the best driving element in the game. She doesn't need to land crits or even deal damage for that matter, because as long as she can apply Hydro liberally, elemental reactions will carry the rest. Pyro's 2 premier reactions, Melt and Vaporize, are amplifiers. How effective they are strictly depends on the source of the attack. Dehya can't afford to have damage this poor, as her element necessitates very high base damage. Why do you think Hu Tao gains a metric ton of attack from Guide to Afterlife? Because she needs it. Could Dehya have been improved through Burgeon perhaps? After all, that's one reaction that doesn't require a strong pyro attack to do its job. There was potential for Molten Inferno's Echoing Fire to help with Burgeon, but a cast interval of 2.5 seconds is too slow for Burgeon, and it doesn't have a large enough AoE to hit Dendro cores that are spread out. If your goal is purely to achieve Burgeon, there's no pragmatic incentive to use Dehya over Thoma. Those problems are not something you can fix by simply decking her out with weapons and artifacts. To show you just how wide the gap is, I believe Hu Tao with C0 and base staff of Homa does 3 to 4 times more DPS than her. Equipment in Genshin has always been a supplement, not a replacement, something to make the character even more effective at their job, such as Emblem of Severed Fate increasing elemental burst damage based on your recharge, implying the character already wants to build DR to begin with. HP artifacts like Tenacity of the Millilith won't make up for the lack of innate strength in her moveset. Thing is, Dehya's design is by no means bad. In concept, it's a great playstyle that speaks to the no-nonsense head-on confrontation championed by her, and I love how she flat out discards a greatsword to beat the living daylights out of her target. Theoretically, she would have been a very enjoyable character to play. With her unorthodox attack pattern, and with how there was no new pyro character for well over a year and change, so much was riding on her being good, or at least serviceable, which makes it all the more disappointing to see her turn out like this. I tried to be as optimistic about a character as possible, but you'd be grasping at straws to find any excuse for her. She was hyped up to be this badass warrior, and yet when we look at her in-game stats, she may very well be the weakest 5-star in the entire game. This has to be a sick joke. They went above and beyond to make her this bad that there's no way this was unintentional. I'm not saying Dehya has to be on the same level as Hu Tao, but they did her so dirty. They didn't just shoot her in one aspect. So many things are wrong with her. Elemental skill actively punishes you for using it. Elemental burst deactivates elemental skill and locks you out of doing anything if you want the full attack. And it can't use follow-up type skills, which are the heart and soul of pyro DPS. I'm sorry for coming off overly critical in this video, more than my usual tone in why no one plays, but I think this is a situation where we can all more or less agree that Dehya is objectively a bad character. The only redeeming quality about her is how likable she is, and that seems to be the driving force behind those who elected to pull for her. There might be a sliver of hope that she could be useful in the future. Her burst presents an interesting interaction that could be capitalized on with more units, so retroactively buffing her is not beyond the realm of possibility, but she'll need major upgrades in that department. The only problem is, if there are OP units in the future that buff other characters up, that will likely also buff Hu Tao, who scales off max health too. I just don't know why they did this. They haven't buffed the character since Zhongli, and they insisted they would never again. But if there's ever a time for them to make an exception, it would have to be now. Shame, really. There was so much potential with this kind of character and a playstyle that I think many of us would enjoy. I even liked the whole storing damage kind of thing, so I was surprisingly disappointed to find out she doesn't actually do anything with it. Considering it caps out at 200% of her max health, it would have been cool if, say, her elemental burst damage is multiplied by the amount of stored Red Ming's blood, as in she can do 3 times more damage with her burst when at max storage. I just don't know how they didn't think things through. But hope this was insightful to those who needed it and entertaining to those who wanted it. Those of you who pulled for her, I salute you. For now, if you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you could leave a like and subscribe, really helps out the channel. Also follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other Why No One Plays episodes if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care.